Cool. So yesterday we kind of got into Sinatra and started talking about MVC just as a little bit of review. The M stood for model. That's like where the data lives, any sort of methods that access or manipulate that data or calculate on that data. All that stuff would be like model stuff. We've also got views, which are going to be basically what the user interacts with in their browser, right? In this context, we're talking generally about HTML with embedded Ruby inside of it, and that gives the user the links that they click on to hit the server and the forms that they submit to hit the server, and of course any response that comes back from the server. And that could be HTML. We could also make sure that there's like attached CSS, and we'll get into that later on in the mod too, of like specifically how we might style apps like this. But then we've also got, after model and view, we've got this notion of a controller that unites them together. So when every request comes in, it's the controller's responsibility to read that request from the view, interpret it as specific instructions that it needs to give to the model, which then does the model's work and returns some data after running some method. And then the controller, in our case, like our literal controller files kind of operating as our server, prepares and sends back the HTTP response to the user who had made the initial request from their view. So that was kind of like what we had talked about yesterday. Today, I would like to kind of bump this down the sheet a little bit and talk about a new concept, which is called REST. What does REST stand for? Does anybody know? What's weird with this one is that like the lowercase, the E technically is lowercase here. So the RE is representational. So it's like the first word is like 2 letters, which is like, I don't know, kind of man-spready, honestly, a little bit rude. Representational state transfer. So what does this actually mean? Representational state transfer, like representation, means like, let's think of everything as a resource. And have a shorthand for talking about it, right? How are we going to represent the resources that are in our application? A resource could be like an HTML page, right? If I went to like aboutus.html at a given like company's webpage, I'd expect to see a certain page there, right? A list of employees. That list might be like a static list. So like about us would give me some intent about what I'm trying to do. And we're trying to think about not just HTML pages as a resource, but maybe it's like a file, right? Maybe it's an MP3. Perhaps it's even like a given chat room where people will connect and like share information back and forth freely. So like anything on the web could potentially be thought of as a resource. And so how are we going to represent that resource? And then this notion of state transfer, I think of this as almost like kind of like a relay race, right? Because the baton needs to get from the beginning to the end, but no individual racer gets to take the baton all the way from the beginning to the end. Similarly, if I went onto a website, I might be looking at a file that I wanted to edit, and I click a button to edit it. That would take me to a form where I can see the information of the file clearly displayed, and then I change the stuff that I don't like, and then I click save, and then I'm back on the page that I started with, and I see a changed file, right? All of that stuff can happen over HTTP, which is stateless. And that's possible because REST gives us like a pattern and a system essentially of passing around IDs and then letting the server re-look stuff up at every new request that lets us transfer the state, right? So we'll say here like a relay race with the ID as the baton, right? We could think of the ID really as the representation of a given resource, and we're talking about ways that URLs can hand off that ID. So for example, you might have the ID of a resource in a link. When the user clicks on that link, the next response is able to use the ID in the link to pull a fresh resource from the database. So any sort of page that would have that link and ID in the URL is going to be about that same resource in some way, and that gives the user the feeling that the resource is kind of always there. And what's kind of under the hood is that the server is just getting a fresh copy of that resource with every request response. That's kind of REST in a nutshell. Do we have any questions on kind of what REST is designed to do in terms of taking our stateless HTTP and making it appear stateful for a user? Cool. So let's talk about how we do this in Sinatra, or we'll talk about in web development in general. Because a lot of times we're going to have routes with URLs, right? So we talk about how our routes will help us represent to ourselves and to the user what we are trying to show or do. So this means that we set up conventions around naming routes. So I'd like us to think about the goal here being like, let's sink into an app. Let's really think of something as a resource. I'm going to use, as an example, something that's randomly on my table that my kid plays with. Okay, so I see a marble, because, yeah, why not? There's a marble. So let's talk about marbles, right? As a user, I want to... all the marbles there are. I want to see them. If I want to see all the marbles, essentially I'm making like a GET request, right? Because I'm going to view some stuff, right? And the way that I would name a route about seeing all the marbles would just be /marbles. Here's some things that I could also potentially use to represent this, but I won't. I could say like all marbles, right? I could say the marbles, right? I might even say like home if my whole site is about marbles, right? These would all be good URL names given certain use cases. What we're attempting to practice this week is like the canonical conventional way. Sorry, I kind of Medea'd that word there for a second. The canonical way for naming these routes. So in this case, the word that we're talking about, if the model name is singular marble, I should write that down here too. Model name will be marble. So if the model name is marble, then the index route would be marbles. And I say index route because that is technically the RESTful keyword that we would apply to this first kind of action, right? So we see a lot of ingredients here. We have a user story, right? Next to a user story, we have a verb, and then we have a URL, and then we also have like a REST keyword. As we talk today about this convention, I'm going to attempt to kind of fill this out table style as we go. I'm going to talk about a few of them up front, and then so we don't get too bored here, I'm going to get into some code, and we're going to try to get a form for creating a book working and talk about how it plays into this REST stuff and what we'd want to do from certain controller spots. We've practiced a lot of the mechanics of this stuff already if we're caught up on labs, but I think the main thing today is to make sure that we're really staying on track with the most conventional way to do things possible, and so that's what I'm attempting to show. So if you have questions about why I'm doing something a certain way this morning, please do ask them, because I think that's entirely the point of this lesson. So if I want to see all the marbles, I would be doing an index type of action at the URL marbles, and that would be a GET request. Let's say that I want to see one marble, like I click on it. I want info on one marble. So if I'm trying to get information, that means that I'm making a GET request again. And the URL here is going to be marbles / and then I can put in whatever ID of marble I happen to be looking up. This is a little bit of review from yesterday as well, right? The REST keyword for this would be show. And then if we wanted to create a new marble, that's going to be... well, let's talk about it. If I want to create a marble, what kind of verb is that? Somebody sitting close up front can repeat something that somebody said further back. Post. Okay, cool. So I will be able to post. Now I have a question for you. If I'm posting to create a new marble, and a marble has like something like a color, maybe I can even sketch this out, right? Really kind of envision this. We'll have color, that's a string. We'll have size, that's a string. So like if I'm trying to save a marble with specific information, I can use a post to do that. My question is, how did the user have information to send in the post request? Thoughts on that? Yeah, they had to see a form for a marble, right? So if I'm creating a marble, let's separate these steps out. The moment that I actually have information about what the marble's color and size are, then I'm ready to actually post. Now here's a fun one. We just say post marbles here, and we'll call this a create. I want to make a little bit of space here to throw something here, but as I've made this space, let's consider that the URL here is exactly the same, right? The only difference is the HTTP verb, but in fact, that's a huge difference. If up until this point, all that you've been thinking about when you think about a route is the URL, it's time for you to understand that the URL and the verb are intrinsic parts of putting a route together so that you don't get confused when like Sinatra has no problem having two routes with the exact same next to each other. And I say that because a very common thing that people do is they get gun shy about having both of these URLs be the same. They don't necessarily realize that they can be the same as long as the verbs are different. So then they want to make like some space, and then they have something like this: post marbles / new. Now, we are indeed creating a new marble here, so I don't think this route is wrong, right? I think it's just a little redundant, because the new in this URL is already implied by the intent of the HTTP verb. Part of the power that we're trying to tap into is like really being able to read into somebody else's very short syntax intent about what they're trying to do and how. So what's nice about post marbles is that we can just say post and people already know that we're going to create something, and they want to know where we're creating something. Oh, we're going to post something to the collection of marbles. Another thing that people do sometimes here is, well, I'm not creating multiple marbles, I'm only creating one marble. So then we have like post marble there, right? I don't know about that. Because wouldn't it be weird if like I told you that some of the important files on my computer that you were free to access were in a folder called My Documents, and then other files were in a folder called My Document? That doesn't seem like a very interesting or good way to like arrange files. I think that it'd be interesting. I don't know if it would be great. I think that just by having everything under the namespace marbles, it keeps us from having to remember that detail, right? We don't have to remember which routes are singular and plural, neither do our users. We can spend all of that brain time that we would have spent thinking about it actually building other features that are cool instead. So as somebody mentioned, like there needs to be a form. If we're going to create a new marble, there has to be a color and a size passed in. So that means that we need to have a form to collect that information based on the user's choice. So I want to submit or fill out a form for a marble. Well, and now all of my stuff here. I want a form for a new marble. How about that? Cool. That's going to be a GET request, and it's going to be marbles / new. This is where the word new goes. It's still in the namespace, but now we have a get, and it wouldn't make sense to say like marbles twice with a get. That would be overriding it. So now we, for this get, we have a specific name after marbles to describe what we're actually seeing pertaining to marbles. In this case, a form to create a new one, and the REST action matches up as well. This is called a new. Cool. So with those four, I want to dive into the code. Excuse me. I legit developed like a cough and a sniffle, so yay us here at Casa Verde. In any case, we've got to put together some code, right? So what did we have from yesterday? Always when I come back into an application, and I'm reflecting on this now because I know that a lot of your week is going to be like working on labs and then taking lunch and coming back to labs, right? Or taking a break and then coming back to a lab. So here's what I think of when I come back to an app. This is the same code that I had from yesterday. I just kind of copied it over. I figured we did enough work in like the environment.rb that I didn't want to like have to repeat myself again, right? That was a little bit tedious. But what I do is when I come back to an app, I don't actually look at DB first. I don't look at the models first. I don't even look at views. I look at controllers, because controllers tell me what's going on, which model needs to connect with which view. So because the controller is the go-between, if I want a good snapshot of the entire MVC look of my app, then I can just go to a controller and kind of move out from there. So if I was trying to jog my memory of what we had already set up, I could start at this first route. We have books. We've used the kind of regexness of this particular string and how it gets handled by Sinatra to say that this / is optional. We tested some things with instance variables not moving between routes yesterday. Don't need to worry about that right now. We do get a list of books. It's book.all. So we make a call to the book model. We set an instance variable. That instance variable is supposed to be used in our index ERB. And we use it here as we iterate through the collection. Once we're iterating in Ruby, we can just refer to a local variable inside of that block scope. And so we can talk to each individual book and get its ID and title printed in order to make a link, which would take us to an individual books page, which will show more information, including the snippet. That book show page also has its own route. The route here has a parameter in it because we have this term in the controller that starts with a colon. Always remember, colon controlin, maybe. I don't know. That would be one way to remember. Like, don't put a colon into a route anywhere else. Like, it's only useful here. If you put this into a view, you'd literally be trying to visit colon ID. And we're not trying to say that. We're just saying whatever comes after the slash, we'll call ID. Therefore, we'd be able to find it in params and get that book onto the page. So that's kind of what we had talked about yesterday. What questions do we have on that as we review? Yeah, so I didn't have the word colon before the word new when we wrote these routes. Hang on a sec. Yeah, when I wrote this, what I meant to say here is that we're not literally going to write ID when we visit this URL. Instead, we're going to have some value that represents an ID, right? The representation in REST. This is where we're going to represent the ID of an individual marble. We're representing the model here that we're talking about with the key name phrase marbles. So yeah, the colon here means I can fill this with any sort of term. When I don't have a colon, it means I'm expecting an exact letter-to-letter match for this, right? So let's talk about how this is going to work in Sinatra. I'm going to make this route for new real quick. Get books. I wrote det. Why not? So at books new, I think the first thing I always do is just put a string here. Because, there's so many things that could go wrong, like my shotgun doesn't start, or I can't get to the page for whatever reason because I mistyped it maybe, or there's some other syntax error in one of the files that config is pulling together. So I'm not going to do a lot of writing at one time. I'm just going to see if I have something happening here. So cool. Let's get this up and running real quick. Let's see. Bundle. And then we'll do a shotgun. Oh, but you know what? Before I shotgun up, let me make sure I've got my database all set. I did just copy paste everything over, so I'm pretty sure it's all good already. But yeah. Just to be sure. Cool. So now that the shotgun's up, we'll go to localhost 9393. There's our books. We can still click a book, and we can go to the book show page. Great. So let's go to books new. Let's see what our hello is. Well, I'm glad I didn't do too much typing because we've got an error here. Couldn't find book with ID new. Has somebody run into this yesterday that wants to reflect on what I've done in my controller that's causing it to say couldn't find book with ID new? Yeah, it's thinking that new is an ID. Why would it be thinking that NEW is an ID if I've got a match for NEW down here on line 19? That's a good question. Yeah, maybe what it's doing is as we go top to bottom through the controller, it checks the URL against each route sequentially. If that was what was happening, then it would interpret the letters NEW as a value for ID here, because this could catch any value. It's not a very specific way to write. Like, we're literally saying any collection of characters after books slash will fulfill that condition. And then it would try to find a book with the ID of new. And you know what? That actually is exactly the error that we're having, finding the book with an ID of new. So yeah, let's try to move this up above books ID. See what that does. Let's refresh. There's our new book. Great. So this is an important thing to see about our controller routes that we didn't have a chance to get into specifically yesterday. So I just wanted to mark that for a minute. If we don't have the most specific versions of a route first in the controller, they'll never get hit. I say this is most specific because we could describe this as books slash 3 specific characters, and then right below it, books slash any number of characters of any kind. So we wouldn't want that second one to override the first. So by reordering this, we now can create a new form for a book. Here's a thing that I want to also talk about as I'm working on a Sinatra app, just as a good kindness, not just to the user, but particularly to yourself. If I add a route to my Sinatra application, I feel like I should always be linking it to something that's already there. So I'm going to go to the index and create a link to make a new book, so that I don't have to manually manage typing URLs in. And then when I make that new book page, I'll probably have a link back to home too. That is going to make it much faster for me to like navigate through my code and debug it later on. So it's just a practice that I have. Open an anchor tag with an href of, let's see, it's going to be the new route for a book. So even based on what we've been doing here, even if I didn't look at the controller, it's going to be whatever I've got /new, books /new, and then we'll say create a new book. And we will close our anchor tag. Cool. Let's see if our index is on and popping. Cool. That's working. I just saw that it's a long list of books. So just for my own feedback loop, I'm going to move the link up to the top of the page. Makes it easier for me to access it faster. Cool. So that link worked. We clicked on new book, and that sent a new request to our controller at books new, and now it printed out the string new book. I think that we should follow the pattern that we got into yesterday of letting the controller talk to any model that it needs to, but then also render some sort of view file. So I'm going to make a new one for the form that we're going to create today. I'm going to call this new.erb. Sometimes you'll see examples where you see a file called _form.erb on the web. You can think of the code in there. Generally, that's going to be like a Rails thing that's happening, so watch out for that. We'll cover that topic a little bit later on next week. But for now, I'm calling it new.erb, not just because it is because it's the thing we're trying to do, but it's literally the RESTful keyword for the thing that we're doing. All of these file names are going to map to the RESTful keywords that we're listing here when there is a get going on. Cool. So at new, I think that what I want to do now is say new book. Make sure that the controller refers to the ERB new book. Oops, sorry, new. And then we will refresh. And now we have new book looking slightly different. Great. So I know that we are now connected to the ERB. And now we can actually get about creating a book. First of all, I noticed that in the index route here, we needed all of the books. In the get here, we needed one book to show one book. Do we need to talk to the book model for this form to create a new book? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Beg pardon, we do so that we can, what with the interface? We do need to interact with the book model so that we can get the book into the database. That's exactly right. So I would say here that when we talk about getting the book into the database, this line 15 that I've got highlighted seems like the database step. So I'm just thinking about that. Right now I'm at the step right before where I just have a form for a book. In Sinatra, I don't think we actually need a book instance until we end up getting to that create step. And that's when we'll call them like book.create or book.new and then book.save, right? So I'm just thinking on that as I realize that like maybe I don't need to call anything here. Like I don't need to necessarily call book.new right here because of what I know about how instance variables like foobar don't travel between routes. Like even if I started building a book right now, I'd still have to like scrap it and then build a whole book from scratch at the next route because Sinatra's going to forget in between. So all I'm really attempting to do is show the user the form right now, and then later on we will call on the book class. But I don't think we need any sort of instance variable in here for now. Let's just make a form. To make a form, we use a tag called form. We will open and close a form tag. And forms are going to have certain attributes that are going to map with controller things, right? So if I want to eventually have this form travel via post and hit the URL /marbles, then there's two attributes that I work with. For the URL, we'd say action. And we'd just say not marbles in this case, because we're making books. So I'll say books. And then we use method to describe the HTTP method, the verb. And so method will be post. And then within a form, we can put various input tags, and then inputs are going to have a type attribute. Generally, a lot of our inputs are going to be like type text. There's also like type number, which is going to restrict you to just entering numbers. There's a type password that's going to obscure characters so you can't see what somebody's typed. And then there's other like attributes that these can have. So for example, we could give it a value, which would give it like an initial value. Book title. Let's just see what this looks like real quick. Let's refresh the page. So we do have a form input now. And because we gave it a value, that text is like just showing up in the input. We can also give it a placeholder. But honestly, like, I mean, see, this is like gray text now instead of like black and white. And then when you click in here and start typing, like the placeholder goes away. But you see how this input like also highlighted when I clicked on it? That's an accessibility thing that lets somebody like with a screen reader or whatever like tab between typable inputs, which is kind of cool. Or somebody who can't like type or use a mouse or whatever. I would say here that we should also do some other stuff then. I think that if we said the ID of this input is going to be the book title, that gives us the ability to make like a label and give it a for attribute that's the same as the ID of the input. Let's say here title, a colon. And then do you see how okay, I'm gonna refresh this and do this again. So I don't have anything highlighted. When I go to click on title here, it will highlight the input that the label is for. So that's a really cool feature of forms that we should probably be doing. There's other lazier ways to label your inputs, but I strongly recommend that you just get into the habit of being able to write labels, because I didn't used to be able to write a label from scratch like I just did. Maybe this is like the second month I've been able to do that, but I've been trying to get better at it, just because it makes the page more usable for everybody. In any case, we need to think about not just like the aesthetics of a form here on the page to help the user, but we need to start playing an anticipation game. We need to think about how a book is going to need to be saved in the database before we can go much further with this form. So I'm going to go into the DB and the schema to review how a book saves. It's going to need to have an author and a title and a snippet. Okay, so what I could potentially do here is, because I have the word title in two places and it's capitalized, I should be able to like do like this. Yeah. Of course, I've missed a couple, haven't I? Yeah. We'll do this. Then we'll do a snippet. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. Well, I could have just changed one letter, but regardless. So let's see how this looks. So now I've got 3 inputs. This is feeling kind of good. We've got 3 inputs. They have a placeholder in here once I start typing. If I wanted to be a little bit different about how the snippet works, right? Instead of using an input here, I could instead use a text area, which would be one way to do it. I don't have my HTML snippets on this file yet, but let me do this real quick. Oh, did I? Sorry. Here, let me pull this back. Is that better? Cool. Sorry, y'all. Apologize for the ears. So I'm just going to comment this out real quick, and instead of having like a really short thing for a long book snippet, let me see here. Yeah, hang on a sec. Input. Microphone. How's that? Is that better? Cool. Yeah, sorry about that. So instead of just having like an input that has a typed text, there's also another element that's called a text area. HTML text area. People dog on this site all the time. People prefer the developer Mozilla org in terms of like going really deep into things, but because this always shows up at the top of my Google search and it gives me the syntax that I need. Is it still loud? Oh no. I feel like the mic is getting louder on its own. That's weird. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me hop off the call real quick, and then I'll hop back on the call and see if that resets anything in terms of the audio connection. Is that cool? Sweet. I'll be right back. Oops. Oh, be kidding me. All right, how do I sound now? That's weird. Let me try this. How do I sound now? I just lost the headphone. Am I coming through now? Check 1, 2. Am I coming through? Check 1, 2.
Check. Oh, the volume here is off. Okay.
Yeah, that was on me.
How about, can you start talking?
Yeah, this is me. My name is Duke. I live in a house and I eat meals.
That is perfect. Yeah. I also there's like the little touch screen in the middle of these projectors, and the volume was set all the way up. I brought it down a little bit, so I think we're good.
Okay, cool. That might help a lot. Sweet. Cool. So let's get back. No, no worries. Let's remember where we were at. Oh yeah, we were just starting to look at the text area so that we could potentially write like a longer snippet. The thing about a text area is that you can still put this into a form, right? You can connect it with a label, but it shows up a little different. Rather than like defining where the value of something would live inside of like the first line of a text area, like we would with like a placeholder tag or a value tag on a form input, instead, we put the value in between an opening and closing text area tag. So if I brought something like this in to play with, then I might do something like, okay, let's fix indentation maybe. The ID here is going to be book snippet. Let's see what a 4-row 50 column, I believe that's columns is going to be how wide it is left to right, and rows is going to be how tall it is top to bottom. And then here I'm going to indent here, and I don't think I'm going to have any sort of like a placeholder here necessarily. I'm just going to like leave it an empty box that somebody can write info into. And let's see what that does. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. We've got, I would say that maybe the fact that like snippet is not on the same line as the text area is a little bit of a naggy thing. A couple of things that I could do is I could wrap like label and input pairs inside of paragraph tags, because I know that a paragraph is going to like display on its own line. If I don't really care about the details of styling and layout right now, I could just also drop break tags after any of the pairs that I want to put a break after. This might make it a little bit more readable. Cool. So we have title, author, snippet. There also needs to be some sort of a submit button on this as well. I'm going to show how this would look as an input. Cool. We can have a submit by saying an input with the type of submit. Once we do that, we have a button. It just says submit. We don't need to have it say submit. We could give it a value of its own, unlike on a text input where the value would be like what the user actually gives us. In this case, it's a button, so the value is just what we're displaying the user. So we'll say create book. Refresh. Cool. Now the button says create book. If I click on create book, this should take all of the information that's in the form. If I say A, B, C, it's going to wrap up all the info and try to take it somewhere. Of course, I'm getting a Sinatra doesn't know this ditty right now because I haven't actually created post books. But what great news, right? Because this is exactly the route that I was hoping I was going to hit. I was trying to make a post request. I was trying to go to /books. It looks like setting the forms method in action has done what I expected it to do. Let's go and try to catch what's happening in the controller. First, I'm going to make some labels of stuff. While we're talking about the keywords today, this is the index action, this is the new action, this is the show action. This one here was just a redirect test. I'm going to comment that out so that like it defocuses. This one here, I think I'm going to have a to do. Implement title search. That'd be a fun thing to get in there later on, if we could. Cool. So index new show, let's make a route for create. Create's going to be our post route to books. Within the post route, I'm expecting, kind of like how yesterday we could put things into a query string after a URL. I could say like question mark and then like rutabaga equals pi or whatever, and then we'd have a key rutabaga and then a value pi, right? Or we could set up like a colon in the controller route to make sure that something shows up in parameters with that name. We're about to explore a third way that things get into parameters. So I'm going to say p params, and I'm going to use the params hash to tell me, did the user actually give me the information that I expected, and is that information labeled appropriately? So I don't think it is yet. Spoiler alert. Let's go and see what happens. We're going to make a book, Carrie by Stephen King. Cool. Okay, so I go to create book, and I see nothing. Nothing like on the screen, right? That's kind of disorienting. What's actually happened is the URL says books now, but I'm not at the books index. That means I must be at like post books. And because post books, we haven't decided to render or like redirect anything. We're just looking at a blank screen. So I need to kind of go back and look at my output. And here we are. Here's our params. Drum roll, please. And then we have an empty hash. So this whole time I've been playing around with this form in the view, but I've forgotten that the job of the view is to actually pass information over to the controller. Can somebody tell me what each of these form inputs is missing that would allow me to get information into the params hash? Name attribute, I heard. Yes. So on each input, whatever name you give the input, that will be the name of a key in the params hash. The value at that key is going to be whatever the user puts in the input. So I'm going to say name equals title. I'm going to say here that name equals author. And I'm going to say for the text area that the name is snippet. And I'm choosing those names because I want keys in the params hash that are kind of one-to-one with what I'd be looking for in the database, right? Since the database is expecting these words, I think it's going to be easiest if we just use the exact same words for those attributes out here in the form and then handle them accordingly in the controller. So having just made that change of putting the name on the three fields, let's go back and run it again. Books new. I'm going to refresh. We'll do like my teacher flunked the planet. It's classic young adult sci-fi, circa like 1995. Cool. It's also like a Kathy cartoon. Great. So I say create book. Cool. Body yielded non-string value. Okay. Oh, but look, this is kind of cool. I think this is literally the browser attempting to print out the params hash, because the params hash was like the last thing that I did in the controller. And now that it's giving me an error, that makes me think that there actually is something in that hash. And look, because we gave those inputs names, now we can see those names show up as keys in our params. So if I were to say like params title, I'd get this out. If I were to say params author, I'd get this out. And if I were to say params snippet, I'd get this out. I actually want to prove that and play around with it here because I think this is like a crucial part of today, and I want to spend a little bit of time in it. So I'm going to run a binding.pry and like practice actually creating stuff before we even do it in the controller. So let's do this. Refresh. Some title. Person, Q, person. Snippet. Hello there, world. Cool. We go to create book. We should be stuck. Yep, we're in a pry session. We're there. We look at params. If I said params title, this is like that indifference thing. Like if I say params string title, same deal, right? That's because this hash is not like just a pure Ruby hash. It's a Sinatra special hash. In any case, we can say params. I'm just going to do the symbols because it saves me a character. Params author. And then params snippet. And if I wanted to practice making a new book, I could say like book.new, where the, what would I say, params title. Let me just try it with that. And it doesn't like that. No, look at the error that I get back, just to remind me. When assigning attributes, you must pass a hash as an argument. String was passed. So if I tried to pass in like multiple strings, I'd probably get an argument error, right? If I tried to do this with all three, params title, params, let's just stop here at author and see what the error would be here if I was miscreating my object. Yeah, there I get an argument error because it's only expecting one hash for every active record object. So throughout all of this, I have to remember to do the key value pattern. So I'd say title is params title. Author is params author. Author, why not? And then the snippet is params snippet. Now that makes a book, and it's got an author that I expect, a title I expect, and a snippet I expect. So now I feel like I've kind of discovered through pry the exact syntax that I'd want to use in my controller. So I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to quiet down the pry for now. We know that params is working, so we're just going to go ahead and make this new book with a title, an author, and a snippet. You're also allowed to, if you want to, like use white space sometimes to like make things a little more readable. If you want, you don't have to, but I don't know, this makes it a little bit nice. And then maybe once we've like got our book, maybe we do a redirect. This is another thing about REST that I want to discuss, is that part of what representational state transfer implies is that when you make a GET request, you're trying to see information that is there. So if you're looking at information that is there, you should also be able to like refresh the page, right? Which is why we try to avoid rendering during a post, rather than like showing something here and giving the user the impression that the moment of creating a new book is something that we'd want to refresh, which could lead to like multiple identical books being sent to the database. We'd want to take the user to a place where the resources are static. So what I'm thinking is that this book, I think that if the book gets added to the database and we go back to the index to look at all of the books, then that book should be like in the list. That's kind of like what my assumption is right now. So I'm going to say redirect /books. I think there's going to be some issues with this code that needs some debugging, and I just want to work through that real quick. So I'm going to take this pry session away. We'll continue doing what we were doing. We'll go to the new. Now notice I was at post books, but by hitting enter in the URL bar, since the URL bar can only make GET requests, I knew that hitting enter would take me back to the index, and I wanted to click on the link. Cool. So title, sure, Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. How great it is to be dared by me. It's like a James Taylor lyric adaptation. We're going to create book. Let me go back and let's look for Daring Greatly. What did I forget? It's not there on the list. What step am I missing in my post route? Pardon? Yeah, I heard save. Yeah, I have this book.new, right? But I want to save this book. So what am I going to call save on? I guess I could just say book.create, right? That would do new and save. Or I have this option too. I could say like book.new and set it to be like book. And then on the next like step, I could say book.save, right? Either one of those would work. I think that I would prefer practicing this style though, because later on there's going to be additional validation checks that we want to do between when we've created an object and when we actually save it. So being in the habit of separating new and save, or assign attributes and save if we're updating an existing object. That's like the sister method of new if you're updating. Basically, by separating it, it's going to help us to be more specific about some conditional logic later on. So I just want people to get used to seeing the two steps explicit like this. Now that we're saving a book, let's actually do it. Let's save the book. So I'm going to go click Create Book here again. Check out our list. There's Daring Greatly. There's our snippet. We have successfully managed to create a book, and that feels pretty darn good. I think that at this point, I want to take questions about this flow in terms of starting with a form, naming our inputs, anticipating params, and creating things in the associated controller. Cool. Do we want to do editing too? I think we should do editing. I think that's kind of important. Let's do editing. So let's talk about editing. I think that editing is like creating, right? Because like creating is really this suite. It's two different things kind of duct taped together. I think for editing, it's the same thing. I want a form to edit a marble. That's going to be a get request to /marbles. We're going to need to edit a specific marble, right? So we need to talk about which marble we're going to edit. So we need to represent the marble's ID in the route, right? Representational state transfer, woohoo. Hurrah. So now marble's ID already has its own get though, right? We're going to show it that way. So we need to add something to this like we did for new. And what we're going to add is edit. That'll totally spell out our intentions, right? We're also going to call this the edit action. And that's going to be separate from what we'd call the update action. So I want to update a marble in the DB. And that's going to be a put request. This is the first time a non-getter post enters the pantheon of verbs for us. We'll say marbles, and we're going to be doing a put request on a specific marble, similar to creating a marble, right? I don't need to literally say new here or edit. I can just say put, because put implies all of the editing that I need, and then I can talk about the specific marble that I'm editing right there. This is going to be called an update action. Finally, while we're here, let's talk about deleting a marble real quick. That's going to be the other verb, delete. We'll also refer to the marble ID. So really marbles /ID, we've represented that resource in 3 different routes, but because one of them is showing, one is updating, and one is deleting, 3 completely different things. Or not delete, sorry, that's going to be destroy, which is a much more baller word in honest cases. Cool. So let's talk about where we're going to actually get into this feature. I want to run to this index. I think that when I click on an individual resource, right here, maybe below back home, I should see a link to be able to edit that specific resource. So what I'm looking at now is books 24, and if I forget what HTML I'm looking at, I can go through this process of like, well, I'm at books 24, that's really books ID, so I can always start at the controller to find my way. I find the route for books ID, and I realize that that route is showing me the show, right? So now I'm in the show, and I can drop a link here right below the back home. We'll do an anchor tag with an href. The href is going to need to refer to this book by ID, and it's also going to need to say edit at the end of that URL because of what we just wrote down in the README, trying to like repurpose this for books, right? So href will be /books /something/edit. Now, how do I fill in the something here? This needs to be the specific book ID, and I can see examples on the page where we've already done this, right? If I wasn't sure, I could go back to the controller. I could confirm that we do have the instance variable book that will respond to all of those reader methods for us. And so here I can interpolate and say, we'll do a render of @book.id. That should give us a link. Or no, not yet, because we have to close the tag, of course. And then we also have to show the user something to click on. That's the hard part about Sinatra, right? A lot of little things to watch. None of them are too big, but together they're huge. We'll say edit this book. Refresh. We have an edit this book. Cool. I'm not really concerned about the styling right now. It does go to books 24 edit, so I think that's pretty solid. If we click on this, we won't know this ditty. We don't want to say a specific ID in the route. So let's build a route that's a little more dynamic. Edit can be get /books /parameter ID. A lot of people use the word wildcard describing this. That's a helpful word for a lot of people to hold on to what its purpose is. We're creating a wildcard where anything becomes an ID. Cool. So books ID edit. Let's first get the book the same way that we did here at the show. And you know what? I've just repeated myself. I'm still in a class, right? This is a civil household. We weren't raised by wolves. Let's make a method. Let's not repeat ourselves. Let's do def find book. And we can just take the setting the instance variable and do it in the method. And then we'll just say find book instead. Once we find the book that we're trying to edit, then I think we should show a form for editing that book. We'll say ERB edit. and then I need to make a view for that. Edit.erb. And then maybe right here, I've done a lot of typing, so at this point I'm just going to say like edit book. And then maybe I'll also do like embed the book's title to make sure that I've actually got it. That would be a good thing to check on too. If I get any errors, like I'll clear them out before we get into the form. So books 24 edit will refresh this time. Edit book, the other side of the sun. Great. So that all hooked up okay. We've got this form file created and hooked up nicely. Let's go ahead and create another form. Now, these are actually so similar that I kind of want to bring in our new form and talk about comparing and contrasting how the two of them need to work. Also in the interest of like not repeating ourselves too much, right? We can always go back and rewind the video if we want to look at the form getting put together piece by piece again. But let's compare and contrast here. If I'm trying to edit this existing book, I probably should label that I'm editing here. Then the first thing I need to think about is the route that I'm going to. Right? So the action is not going to just be books anymore. It's got to be books / whatever the ID of this book is. But check it out. Since we started with the state of the book in the URL of show, that helped us build the link to edit. And now we're in the link to edit and we found a book. So we should have instance variable book. So that's another thing about REST that we're talking about, right? Like the user has made separate requests and responses. There's not one book. It's just we keep looking up the same book as different Ruby instances over and over as different requests come in. So anyways, we should be able to have that book in here and interpolate whatever the ID of the book is. So something like this, double that, and then render and say at book.id. And we're not going to do like a /edit here because like we're submitting the form. It's got to be like a put request, right? So then we just say like put, right? And everything else should be the same. I will say one thing though, that like maybe instead of placeholders now, we actually do fill the form in with real values, because instead of creating a new book where we wouldn't want to tell the user what they're typing, maybe we do want to tell the user what they have typed in this case. So instead of book title, we'll interpolate the book's title. Let's just see if that part works, and then we can do it with the others if that's working. Edit book, yeah, title there, cool. Author, book, author, snippet's not in there yet, but we'll get that in there, cool. Let's change book author to an embed. We're about to run into a fun little snag, right? One of my favorite times in our curriculum where we get to see that the internet is just kind of broken. I'm very excited, by the way. A little bit of suspense. Huzzah. Cool. So book.author, and then like in here where we would have filled text in a text area from the example, I'm just going to put the book.snippet. So now the edit form is holding on to the information about the existing book, right? And if we wanted to edit a different book than like 24, we go to 25. We'll be looking up a different book and filling in different information. I think the submit button should say update instead of create, right? Can refresh that. Let's come up with a place to catch it. I don't want to see another doesn't know this ditty because like I'm smart, right? I can learn from my past mistakes. So here I'm going to say update. Should probably move this create back up above edit. Just kind of like feels like having the table of contents out of order to me, personally. So cool. In the update route here, we're going to say like put, and patch is fine too. I just like saying put because it's fewer characters. Put books /ID. So then we're not going to step on the toes of our show route because the verb is different. And then how about right here, like just to make sure that we're nice and hooked up, I'm just going to say got to the update route. Cool. Let's see if we go back and look at this form, if we can actually hit this route that we've defined as put books ID. If I'm not sure if this form is pointed in the right direction, I can always inspect the HTML. I can look up at the top. It will go to books 25 with a method put. That looks pretty good to me, so I will proceed. Let's say a circle of, I'm going to change the title of this book to a circle of silence. We click update book. Well, what just happened? It says a circle of quiet. This is weird, y'all. So look, if you look at this URL, it's really strange because now we have a query string with title equals and snippet equals and like a whole lot of like special characters because we can't have spaces in a URL, so they change them to plus signs and stuff like that. Here's what happened. We didn't actually make a put request. So the way that the internet was set up was so that we could do all these HTTP verbs, and then a bunch of people built browsers that only worked with get and post, and so now the internet isn't as good as it could have been. That's just the honest truth, right? We can't just say method put here, because when you say method put, the form is like, wait, I'm supposed to do something that's not a post, and then it's like, oh wait, I only know how to do a get if it's not a post. So then what it literally did was made a get request to the show page for the book, and then included all of this param stuff in that get request as query parameters in the URL. Just trying so hard to do its best, absolutely falling on its face. There's a literal hack that we need to use. I believe that it's called method override in the context of Sinatra. Let me look this up. Sinatra method override, yeah. It's a config thing. And I'm going to look up override on here. This is one of those things, y'all. Method override. Okay, so we can say method override when it's true. An actual HTTP request method will be overridden by the value of a method parameter. So if we can get a key name of method into our params hash, and the value of that key name underscore method was put, then we can get Sinatra to work with us here. The issue is just that literally when you submit a form, some browsers don't know how to do anything other than post, and so a lot of web tools are designed this way to just assume that a form is only ever posting unless there's some sort of specific override that happens. It's clunky and weird, and it's all over the internet. Everything is held together with duct tape and twine, and we live at the pleasure of dice. Cool. So we'll say set method override true. And now I'm going to attempt to override the method. I'm going to add an input because I know that this is how I get stuff into my params hash. So I'll say an input, but I can do a hidden input too, right? I don't have to show an input to the user if I don't intend for the user to change it. And in this case, we're just doing it for some under the hood hack stuff. So I'm going to say input type hidden. I'm going to say the name of this is underscore method because that's how I hack into the method override. And then I'm going to say the value here is put. And to make sure the form would otherwise normally go to do a post thing, I'm just going to say method post up here and like kind of leave this line as it was. The URL still needs to be correct, right? I can't get away from writing the real URL in that first line of the form. But whenever the method post needs to be overridden by a put or by a delete, then I will use this hidden input with the name of method to set a different value for the HTTP verb that I want to use to hit the route. And now having made that change and having made the edit in the controller enabling method override, I believe that if we go to edit this book and click, we're actually going to hit our update route instead of making another show request. So that's the piece that's tricky about these forms, is this override piece when you have to do editing. It's not the only tricky thing about editing though, right? Because in this controller, we had to also find the book that we were trying to edit, right? We had to travel to a URL from the show page, which required us to interact with the book that we had already found in a previous route. In my opinion, if you can accomplish editing a resource in Sinatra from start to finish, including like the features that need to exist around it for it to make sense, I feel like you've covered about 80% of the things that you really need to understand in Sinatra. So I personally, in my study, would always optimize for like, can I get to a point where I'm editing a resource? Because I found it a very efficient way to like get the touch and practice and muscle memory on all of the different things in an app. In any case, we've hit the route. Let's bring it home. Like I said, the cousin of new is assign attributes. So I'm going to bring this in, and we're going to talk about a specific book. Hey, now that we're in the update, we can use our find book method again. Find book. So now we have an instance variable book. So I'm going to say at book dot assign attributes. And then this is just like new, but we do it for an existing book. So I found a given book based on the ID that's in the URL using this method find book. We talk to params ID. We have a book instance. That's now the instance variable book. On the instance variable book, I call assign attributes, which is going to take a hash in and then rewrite that Ruby object with the new keys and values. And then finally, I'll be able to call book.save. And then I think here we should redirect back to the book. Here's a thing that people do a lot, and I'm going to do it here, and you might see the mistake that I'm making. I know Jason probably does, because I think you asked about it. Redirect books ID. But wait, I don't want that books ID, right? I need the books ID specifically. So I say like at book.id. Because I need to redirect to a specific URL with a specific ID mentioned. Cool. So let's try this out. I'm going to go back to the book 25 by hitting enter in the URL bar. So now it's a circle of quiet. I'm going to try to change this to a circle of silence again. And I'm going to say edited at the start of the other ones so that we can see that they were edited. We're going to update the book. Oh, this page isn't working. Localhost didn't send any data. Empty response. This is a fun one. So what's happening here? I don't have an error in the browser, but it feels like an error happened. As I said yesterday in those little like list of things that I think I would have wanted to do as a coder earlier, I need to be able to go here and look at my errors in the shotgun itself, because these errors are always going to mirror what's in the browser, and sometimes the browser won't even have errors that live here. So bad URI, and it's because it's trying to go to localhost books and then literally hashtag curly brace at book.id. So what did I do in my redirect that I can change very quickly to make sure that I actually interpolate the string? Yeah, we need the double quotes. I used a single quote string and tried to do the Ruby string interpolation in it, and that just doesn't work. Ruby gives us single quote strings so we can be character specific about what we type. I don't want to be character specific. I want Ruby to interpret this as a call of .id on the instance variable book, and I want it to fill in a value here and interpolate it. So knowing that, I'm going to go back to books 25. I think it's still edited though, because if we got as far as the redirect, we should probably see new attributes on the book. And we did. Look, I have destroyed literature. I immediately feel regret, and I want to undo what I did. How presumptuous of me, right, to retitle a book of hers. So then I click Update Book, and that loops us back. That takes us back to the show page. Those are kind of the two ways of the three that we would use a form. The third way that we haven't really talked about specifically, the third way would be deletion, right? If a user needed to delete something, they would need to probably create a form that had no inputs except for a hidden one to override the post method with a delete. And then the button itself, the input submit, might say something like delete this. It's a real quick attempt, right? It might look something like this. I already know we're a little over time here, and I apologize. Form, close the form. We'd have an input that's a submit. That would have a value of delete this. And then the form would have to have an action that takes us to like a book specific ID again. It'd be like /books. Oops, I need an equal sign in here.
Hey Duke, someone said in line 6 where you have value, could it be value or name?
I think if it's name, that I'm not sure if that's going to work. Let's try it out both ways. I'm just going to say name here. So we have books, book ID, and then this closes the string. And then the method will be post, but we know better. It's not really going to be post. We'll do a hidden input. Type will be hidden again because we don't need to see it. We just need to set it. We're setting the name to underscore method because that is the specific key in the params hash that Sinatra uses to sort this thing out. Value equals delete. See what that looks like on a show page. Edit this book. It just says submit. It doesn't actually say delete this. So I don't think that name hit the way that we wanted it to. I'm going to try setting it to value again. So yeah, just a weird thing of like the submit. Name is more about like communicating what would go across the wire, right? When we set names in a form, we tend to be setting keys in the params hash that we're going to send. And so really, we don't really even care about a name on the button because the button is something that we set. It's not provided to us from the user. If I click on delete this, then we have Sinatra doesn't know this, did he? Delete books 25. So we've actually hit a delete route, and that would close up our kind of RESTful path here, right? We wrote all 7 down here. Index show new create edit, update, and destroy. So the last thing that we have to implement is that destruction. And we could say here get, or sorry, not that, delete books ID. Yeah, I feel like now after running into that redirect thing, I'd almost want to go back and like refactor this controller maybe. I'd take like 5 minutes to make every single string like a double quote string rather than having some single quote strings and then some double quote strings that I need for interpolation, just like maybe just using them all as double quotes. In any case, what are we going to do here? We need to find the book with the given ID. So yet again, this find book method proves invaluable. We had to go and find params ID from the URL, use that with a book.find to get a specific instance, which gets set to @book. Then we could say @book dot delete or destroy. And then we should be able to redirect back to the, I'd say the index. There's no show page for this book anymore. So I think if we just go back to /books after deleting, that should prove to the user that they don't have that book anymore. We're not going to confirm a form resubmission. You see that when I hit refresh and it gives me this? This is the piece I was talking about earlier, just to do a quick pivot. This was me attempting to do the deletion, right? And so I'm sitting at a delete route right now. And when I hit refresh, my browser wants to stop me. It's like, I can tell that we're not at a get route. Are you sure you want to refresh a change to the database right now? Like, are you really going to resubmit a form and make another change? This is why we try not to render during a put or a post or a delete. We always try to redirect so that the browser doesn't get too confused. And so we don't accidentally touch our data too much. I'm going to hit enter here and make a get request to books 25. That's our show page. Then if I click delete this, it should take us back to the index and we shouldn't see a circle of quiet in the list anymore. I don't see it. I'm looking at all of our purple links and it's just not there. 27, 26, 24. So yeah, book 25 is now gone. And in terms of our REST convention and kind of covering all of the different actions, I think that we've actually now got an app that covers it all, right? We have this index. We can see a whole list of books. I can go and look at an individual book. I can edit a book, make a change, save the book. A Wrinkle in Times Square. It's like a kid in King Arthur's Court. But like remade. Cool. So like we change it up. We can delete a given book. I don't know why I would do this. Why would I delete this book? Oh gosh, I feel evil. Great. But yeah, we have editing, deleting. We can go about creating a new book. We can take a form for that. Pop some things in. Hey, by Bob. Bob's second book. It's a reply to the critics that said that his first book was too short. Cool. So we've basically covered like in this app so far the 7 things that we can do with REST: creation, editing, deleting, and viewing individual records or all of the things that there are. That's kind of the only things that we can really do in an app. When I look at a Twitter feed, I'm looking at an index of tweets, right? When I'm looking at a user profile, I'm looking at a show page for a user. When I'm editing a Facebook status, right, I'm doing an edit on an individual post. Ditto for if I'm deleting something. If I'm on Amazon and I add something to my cart, I'm probably creating a join between my user and like a given purchase that's pending or something like that. There's a bunch of ways that we can look at the web. In this style of looking at the web, we think of our nouns as like a resource, and we have a very typical way of naming the things that we do with resources. So if tomorrow I literally did need to make an app to catalog all the marbles that my kid has left around the kitchen, then I would use the exact same kind of naming styles and conventions that we've just put together in this controller. And that gives us the advantage of always being able to see what somebody else who writes RESTfully intends us to do at a given URL and what they intend something to be for. Do we have any questions on the REST conventions and the little form hacks and like inputs and stuff like that for now? Yes.
Site would only recognize like post and get,
Yes.
but we do have other methods for making requests. So does this apply to all websites on the internet?
Yeah, basically there were a few years where like 2 of the biggest browser manufacturers just weren't supporting anything other than get and post. And so like we just ended up with this history of the internet where it was kind of baked in to not assume that half of the HTTP verbs were accessible to us. There's actually even more than get and post and put and delete, by the way. If you look up all of the HTTP verbs, there's many more of them, right? Unfortunately, the internet is like made by human beings, and human beings have different conflicting ideas about what part of a project is crucial to build out and maintain, or if their style of doing things is better than somebody else's style. So one person said, like, actually, we can really think of everything on the web as just being a matter of getting something or making a change to the database. So why don't we just like overload post and just have get in post? And other people were like, but my verbs, my expressiveness, my intentions. Thinking of like a Black Mirror episode where you have to like express all of your feelings through a bear or something like that, right? But that's kind of how the web is right now, because it's not perfect. And I wasn't joking. It is. There are many other things, like when you look at things like time zones, or trying to save things in distributed databases. It's a wonder that anything on the internet works at all. It works because like diligent coders like building things like Sinatra say, oh, I'm going to come up with a way to give us the expressiveness of multiple HTTP methods, because developers need that regardless of what browsers are capable of. So they figure out these ways to do these method override hacks so that even if a browser won't support more than get and post, we can have one standardized way to write our code, so that any given browser could run it. And we tend to write our code for like the most restrictive environment, right? So if we have like 6 devices but one of them has like special rules, guess what? We're going to write for the special rules, and that's going to cover like everything else too. I don't know if that answers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. Are there any instances where we would use those 4 methods, or should we assume we'll never use those?
We're not going to really use them in a form for the form method, right? When we're building the method attribute on a form, we're going to kind of keep this one up here as post, and any overrides to put or delete are going to happen in the hidden input here. That's like one of the very few things that we're kind of just doing and memorizing by rote as a part of our workflow. And it literally is for the same reason of like if you have a button, if I'm working as like a cashier and they're like, that says fries but it's actually the drink, so just make sure to press fries when it's drink. There's no reason for it other than just like, people didn't build it perfect but we get along with it. So yeah, we're just going to generally say post in a form here. Later on when we get into Rails, this is going to be black boxed, right? So with Rails, you'll be able to pass along a key value where method is the key and whatever verb you want is the value, and Rails will do the under the hood work of making that work in whatever browser you're in. But make no mistake that under the hood, Rails is still having to do some hacky stuff to put it all together. The advantage of working in Sinatra this week is so that we can see it ourselves, and not be too head scratchy when Rails seems to magically do stuff that would seem to require a lot of calculation and conditionals under the surface. In fact, the calculation and conditionals are taking place, but they'll just be hidden from us later on. Other questions?
Yeah, in our routes, why do we default to single strings?
That's a really good question. I think that I don't know why people default to single strings, honestly. Maybe because you don't have to hold shift when you type the character. Maybe because people like the aesthetics of a single quote string. Maybe because like whoever wrote the documentation for Sinatra preferred single quote strings, and so everybody who wrote routes in Sinatra afterwards started by copying and pasting things from documentation and then just followed the syntax conventions that they had set previously. I think that last explanation is probably the closest to how humans and myself like actually work and behave, right? You bring something in that works, you don't think too much about the specifics of it, and then things grow around it, and then you optimize for consistency of presentation as opposed to thinking deeper about like, why did I make that first one a single quote or double quote string? Perhaps another reason to say single quote and not double quote strings is to like maybe express some intent about this is exactly as I expect this string to be parsed. But as you see here, like I can still navigate this page having changed every single thing to double quotes. I should really get that back home link on different pages too. Let me try that real quick. I want to get a back home link on like every single page while we're doing this. In the show, we had this, right? Back home. Great. Cool. Let's pop it on the new. Pop it on the edit. I think the other pattern to watch for is that like for each object, by the way, we're really only going to see like edit index new show for the most part if we're doing conventional stuff, because the other three RESTful things are a post and a put and a delete, and those are the kind of things that we do in the database and not in the view. So like as I'm trying to like conceptualize all of that, I think that's a fun little relationship to contemplate too. Um, sorry. Yeah, other questions? All right. All right, y'all. Oh, wait, did you say no questions?
Yeah.
Cool. We broke the awkward silence at exactly the same time. All right. Thanks so much, y'all, for taking the time on this Zoom. I'm very open to feedback. If there was other things other than like the sound stuff that eliminating them in the future would make it easier for you to stay connected with learning in an environment like this, I'm very open and curious to figuring that out. Um, I am currently sniffling and coughing, as you might have been able to tell, so we'll see if I got that Roni or not, but we'll find out. In any case, let me know if you're struggling on any of this Sinatra stuff, or on the other side of things, if you find that like you're powering through a bunch of labs and you'd like to have like a bonus project or something deployed so that you could maybe attempt to build something off of a vaguer set of user stories and really test how comfortable this stuff is for you if you get to that point. I don't expect anybody to honestly get there before like end of tomorrow at the very earliest, but who knows? There's a wide range of experience. Everybody's learning is individual. Please reach out if you need anything at all. That's all I've got for this talk.